Welcome back to KHTS Radio. This is KHTS Co-News Director Jade Aubuchon, and I am joined today by Los Angeles County Deputy District Attorney Jonathan Hatami. Thank you so much for coming in. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming in. We have some really exciting things to talk about today. If you're listening and you recognize Mr. Hatami's name, there is a good reason for that. He has prosecuted several high-profile torture murder cases against the parents of abused children, the most famous of which our listeners will recognize as arguably Gabriel Fernandez, whose horrible death was the focus of the next Netflix documentary series, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, which I hate having to say that you are well known for prosecuting several of those cases. That is just devastating.
You know, children, especially children who are abused, tortured, or murdered, need a voice, need someone to step up for them in court and, tell the public what happened to them and try to seek justice for them and seek justice for their family members. And so the cases are hard, they are difficult, but they're important. Children are our most vulnerable victims. They deserve for us to make sure that they're protected, and they deserve justice if something bad's happened to them. So even though the cases are difficult and it's tough sometimes when I have to talk about those type of cases, I think most people say, hey, I'm glad you're handling those cases because most of us don't want to do those type of cases. And so for me, it's an honor that I get to fight for children, especially because, as a child I was abused. And so for me, it's a passion of mine. Children who feel powerless or helpless or hopeless, I want to stand up for them and fight for them.
And that's become increasingly relevant in the past few years, considering our current Los Angeles County District Attorney, whose name has become a bit more household for kind of the opposite reason that you've become well known. You announced last month that you're running to replace your boss, the current LADA, George Gascon. And if you're listening and you don't know Gascon, he took office in 2020 and since then has been faced with some very heavy criticism from a lot of different avenues. Law enforcement, victims of crime, and even his own office, your office, for some of the policies that he's enacted. You've been a pretty outspoken voice as one of those critics. You've backed multiple recall efforts to remove Gascon from office, all of which have failed, although they did make it to the ballot this last time around. And you've even sued him for retaliation in the workplace. How has that history led to you throwing your hat in the ring?
I'm raising my children here in this community. I fight for children. I want to make sure that your children and the children in this community and all over Los Angeles County are protected. I just want to make sure my children are protected and they have a safe home. I want to make sure families have a safe home and safe community. When George Gascon took office, he enacted 66 blanket policies. Those policies affected the safety and well-being of our children and of our families. And they were scary policies. He said that if a child's arm was broken or leg was broken or ribs was fractured, we couldn't charge a special allegation of great bodily injury. And for me, that's shocking. Those are cases I handle on a daily basis. The safety of our community is important to me, and it's important to a lot of people. And I think most people want public safety. They do want reforms. They want our system to be better. But ultimately, a DA's job, number one job, is public safety. And I can tell you, if your listeners want to know, when George enacted those policies, a week later I had a case of a little 4-year-old girl who was tortured and murdered by her mom. And George Gascon ordered me to remove certain allegations in that case, and George Gascon ordered me to remove strike priors in that case. And for a 4-year-old girl who I had went to her autopsy, who I had filed her case, who I was fighting for her family, I just wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to remove allegations and enhancements that were 100% provable. It wasn't like we were overreaching. It wasn't like this was an individual who could be rehabilitated. This was an individual who has committed crime over a long period of time and tortured and murdered a 4-year-old girl. And I wasn't going to stand by and allow George Gascon or anybody not to fight for that child.
I think some of the main policies that we hear about when it comes to Gascon is, as you mentioned, the lack of charging enhancements. And, obviously, I'm a lay person, but I do have some interactment in terms of reporting on law. So I know what that is. But could you explain, kind of in layperson's terms, why are enhancements relevant and why is it so important that he isn't allowing them to be added to cases?
And I'll relate back to here in Santa Clarita. We've had a major gun violence problem in Newhall. we've had a lot of teenagers or younger people shooting each other and also killing each other. The problem is when you don't charge enhancements, gun enhancements, you're basically saying gun violence is okay. And so when you charge assault, or when you charge a murder, or when you charge some type of crime, if you're using a firearm, we get to charge an enhancement. And most people, Democrats and Republicans, are against gun violence. We've had a lot of gun violence here in Santa Clarita, even in Saugus, the school in Saugus. And so most people, I would hope, are against gun violence. And so we need to enforce our laws. And those laws are, if you use a firearm and you hurt somebody or you kill them, we should be able to charge an enhancement. And that makes sure that individuals who are shooting people or killing people are punished to the fullest extent, and then they can't get out and then hurt and victimize somebody else. Another thing that relates to our community is fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing our young people, killing people that don't even know that they're taking fentanyl. They're being poisoned. They're taking a pill, and they're assuming it's one thing, and it's actually fentanyl. George Gascon won't charge those cases to the fullest extent of the law. That also affects people in our community here in Santa Clarita. And so what he's done is he's taken office and he's failed to do his job as the district attorney. And that doesn't mean we can't help individuals. That doesn't mean we can't reform the system. That doesn't mean we can't rehabilitate. But if you're shooting people and killing them, if you're giving them fentanyl and as a result people are dying, those are cases we need to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. And George isn't even prosecuting those cases. So those are certain types of enhancements and allegations. Another one I brought up was great bodily injury when it comes to children. So basically what we're saying in California is if you injure a child, a helpless child, we should be able to charge a special enhancement to say that that's worse than injuring a person. Even though injuring a person is bad, injuring a child is worse. And so these are type of the enhancements that we've created. Another one I can tell you is hate crimes. So George Gascon got rid of hate crimes on day one. He also got rid of the hate crime murder. If you murder somebody and it's a hate crime, George Gascon refused to allow us to charge that as well. And people don't understand that. You know, I know many people talk about hate crimes, and it's been a big issue in Los Angeles. We've had over 100% increase in hate crimes. And hate crimes affects everybody. It affects our communities. And so when George did that, I think people were shocked because people thought he was coming in to help. People thought he was coming in to reform. That isn't help or reform when you tell communities, especially communities of color, that we're not going to charge hate crimes to the fullest extent of the law. That's also a special enhancement or allegation we get to do. And they're all in the Penal Code. They've all been passed. They're laws that we're allowed to use. And so we should use those laws, especially when it comes to vulnerable victims.
So what I'm seeing here is that most of these laws are essentially a reflection of, I think, what some people would call common sense. Is if you know somebody has a history of, you say if somebody has a history of lying to you, you're not going to trust them when they say that, oh, I promise I'm not going to do it again. And you're going to hold that previous action and their history against them in just a personal conversation. And this is the law saying you can do the same thing when it comes to other types of crime. Would you say that is correct?
I would. And you're right. It is just common sense. I know some people, when they think about prosecutors, they think we're constantly against people or trying to get people. I can tell you this. First off, I fight for children. My entire career, I've done domestic violence cases, elder abuse cases, hate crimes cases, cases with vulnerable victims. Mm-hmm. And so, I've dedicated my career to fighting for vulnerable victims. And that's important to me. And it's just common sense, fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. And, the prosecutor should be doing that. Our number one job is public safety, making sure that the public is safe, making sure that we provide justice for victims and their family members, and then making sure that somebody who's doing something bad doesn't get out and do something bad to somebody else and re-victimizes another person. All of those are common sense. All the laws I'm talking about are in the Penal Code. It's not like anything that I've brought up to say that we're going to do this or that or the other. And so there are laws we're allowed to use. And so we should be able to use the laws that are in the Penal Code to make sure that our community is safe.
And I think I loved how you brought that up. Santa Clarita has been kind of one of the epicenters in terms of LA County, if not northern LA County. I can't remember the specifics on it. In terms of the fentanyl crisis over the last several years, I believe we had 30-something people die last year proven from fentanyl, and that's thanks to Kerry Quashen, who's actually the host of one of our other shows. Who comes in on Mondays. He's a great source of information for that. But as somebody who lives in the Santa Clarita area, you're very familiar with the issues that are affecting not only LA County at large, but our community. And this isn't something that I think one of the things I hear is that's an LA issue. That's a Valley issue. And Valley, they don't mean our Valley, they mean the San Fernando or the Antelope or pick any of the other valleys. This is something that affects all of us, and as much as we like to pretend we're a bedroom community, we're the third largest in the county now. This is relevant to us. We had 2 kids, I say kids, one of them's my age, get shot a couple weeks ago because of people with a history, a known history of violence.
We've had an increase in violence here in our community, and I think that it's affected a lot of people. I think we did have a lot of these smash and grabs here for a long time because of the bail issue, where George wasn't instituting bail. But then now we've kind of moved into gun violence, we've moved into fentanyl, and things like that, which the community needs to take note about. Because our children, they're innocent children, they're taking pills and they don't know that they're laced with fentanyl, and they're being poisoned. And we need to do something about it. What George says is he doesn't want to go back to the war on drugs. My response to that is prosecuting fentanyl dealers. We have a war on people. We have a war on our people here in the community, where fentanyl dealers are at war with them and they're killing them. And so I'm not saying we should have a war on drugs. I think the majority of people who are addicted to drugs, we need to help them, because that's a disease. And so we need to make sure that they go through a program and they're rehabilitated, and we help them get back into society. But if you're out there dealing fentanyl and you know that there's fentanyl in a pill, and you lie to somebody and say it's Percocet or something like that, and as a result a child gets killed, I think we should be allowed to charge that as a second-degree murder case if we can prove it. Because what it does, one, is it causes the deterrent. A lot of these dealers are like, uh-oh, I'm going to be charged with second-degree murder, I better not do that. Mm-hmm. Number 2, it tells the community that you take these cases serious. Number 3, if you take a dealer and prosecute that person and remove them from the community, they're not dealing anymore. So they can't hurt anybody else. And so that's not a war on drugs. That's actually helping people and helping our communities be safer.
Excellently explained. We've talked quite a bit about some of Gascon's policies and Gascon's removal of policies, however you'd like to phrase it. What would you want to change? Let's pick 3 of the most important policies that you would want to change if you're elected as DA.
Number 1 would be parole hearings. George Gascon disallowed deputy district attorneys to go to parole hearings. And what I can tell you about that is, let's say that your son or daughter was killed. And let's say that that person comes up for parole in 20 years. You're not notified by the DA's office that there's a parole hearing, and you have to go to that hearing by yourself. Number 2, let's say that somebody was a serial rapist, and they raped numerous individuals, including you, and that person got a life sentence, and that person got up for parole. You'd have to go to a parole hearing and face that rapist on your own, by yourself, without a prosecutor. That just isn't caring, it isn't right, and it isn't something we should be doing in Los Angeles. We are the only county in the entire state of California that doesn't allow prosecutors to go to parole hearings.
I'm a real quick cut in on that. We actually have a story almost exactly like that. There was a triple murder that happened in the 1970s. The killer is still behind bars, but his parole hearing came up, and the way that the children and older siblings of 2 of the victims, it was a mom, a son, and another little boy who lived next door. They were all killed by a teen who was known to have mental health issues. They found out about it through a random call, not from the district attorney's office. And this was something that happened, 40, 50 years ago. And this was still devastating to them. So being able to see that real world impact, which we actually did do an interview with them here at KHTS, it's painful. It is so hurtful for these families to feel so alone. They came to the radio station in their hometown from 50 years ago because they didn't feel like they could talk to the DA's office.
Can you imagine that? That isn't a reform. A reform means making things better. We're making things worse. It's very uncaring and unempathetic to not want to fight for the family members of victims. It's actually a disgrace. It's despicable, in my opinion, and it just completely abandons victims, and it completely abandons the families. And it's not something we should be doing, and it's not humane. It's really inhumane. And so I would change that day one. Another thing I would change day one is we would charge fentanyl. People who kill children or anybody with fentanyl, we would charge them to the fullest extent of the law. That would mean second-degree murder, which George refuses to charge. So I'll give you an example. If you commit a DUI, you get arrested, you get charged. And let's say you go out and commit another DUI and you kill somebody, we charge a Watson murder, which is called second-degree murder.
Is that technically a negligent homicide?
It is negligent homicide. And we call it second-degree murder here in California, but it is negligent homicide.
Okay.
So fentanyl would be the same thing. If you're dealing fentanyl and you know that you're tricking somebody and you know that that could kill somebody and that does kill somebody, if we can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, we should be able to charge second-degree murder in that case. It's only right because what it's telling people is you know that fentanyl kills, and people know that. You know that you're tricking somebody, and maybe you didn't intend to have that person die, but it's second-degree murder because it's called implied malice murder. And it's the same thing with DUIs. Most of the time people get in a car and they're drunk. They don't say, hey, I'm going to go kill somebody today.
No, they just don't care, or they don't think it's going to happen because, I can handle my drink, or, they're, in this case, that pill isn't going to be the pill.
Exactly. And so it's something that allows a prosecutor, if you have the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, to charge that in the most serious cases. So I would change that. The third thing I would do is change his policy on enhancements. So hate crimes, gun violence enhancements, great bodily injury enhancements, large amounts of drug enhancements, things of that nature. We should be able to charge those. Those are important. They're in the law. They're there for a reason. They're there because you protect vulnerable victims. Another thing I would do, which I think is important for Santa Clarita, is bail. We have a major bail problem. And so George Gascon believes in zero bail. I just don't. I don't believe in that. My policy would be there would be presumptive zero bail for misdemeanors that are nonviolent. So domestic violence, child abuse, sex crimes, if those are misdemeanors, we're going to have bail. But all nonviolent misdemeanors, presumption should be zero bail. But for all felonies and for dangerous misdemeanors, which are domestic violence or child abuse or sexual abuse, there should be bail set. And what happens is in 2 days you go before a judge, and then the judge gets to determine if that person should be released or not. And it should be based on public safety. If you're committing a lot of crimes, that should be taken into consideration. If you failed to appear in the past, if you have a lot of prior convictions in the past, if it was a violent crime, if there's victims out there that are afraid, that should be a consideration also. So a judge then considers that. He wants to impose blanket zero bail on all nonviolent felonies or non-serious felonies. The problem with that is domestic violence and child abuse in the penal code are technically considered nonviolent. And so those would be some of the crimes. And that's the problem is a lot of people in the community, he tricks them. So he says, nonviolent felonies, nonviolent. Well, people think, that must be okay. The problem is the penal code has made certain crimes technically nonviolent, which are violent. Domestic violence is violent. Child abuse is violent. Certain types of sex trafficking is violent. Certain types of sex crimes are violent, and they've been considered nonviolent. Drugging somebody and raping them is considered nonviolent in California. I would consider that violent. That's the complete, drugging somebody and then sexually assaulting them is horrendous. You never recover from that. And can you imagine just releasing that person? That's just not fair. It's not fair to the community. It's not fair to the victim. So I definitely would change that as well. And that does affect Santa Clarita because I can tell you many of the police officers here arrest people and then they get released right away. And it really demoralizes them. And then the community gets upset because those people then go out and commit other crimes. And that shouldn't happen. And it doesn't mean we don't want to help individuals. We do. We want to rehabilitate when we can. We want to help people when we can. But if you're committing crime upon crime upon crime, you're really telling people you don't want to be rehabilitated. And that means public safety still has to be number one. And then with public safety being number one, we move into trying to help people and trying to rehabilitate people.
And I think you've used a couple of really good examples here because speaking with our local Santa Clarita Valley Sheriff Station, I hear a lot of those same parts of frustration. I get the arrest logs every morning. I see the people who are arrested, and there are so-called frequent flyers. I think it was told as a funny story during one of our Santa Clarita crime updates, thanks to our local Captain Justin Diaz, but it wasn't. It was about a guy who had been arrested, I'd say probably 24 times within maybe a 6-month period. And then there was another story that we at KHTS covered where a guy was arrested for, I believe, grand theft auto or auto theft of some kind. I can't remember what level. He was held overnight, I'd say probably not even for 12 hours, released, and this is when the Santa Cruz Valley Sheriff's Station was still right across the street from, I think, the Toyota dealership. What did he do? He left, grabbed a car from across the street, and committed the exact same crime all over again within 30 minutes of leaving the sheriff's station. And what did he have? 0 bail.
And that's the problem, is that, smaller level misdemeanors, yes, I get it. We don't want to ruin somebody's life.
Yeah.
People make mistakes. I've made mistakes. And so those I get. But if you start committing felonies, or you start committing violent misdemeanors or felonies or crime upon crime upon crime, 0 bail says you lack any accountability or responsibility. The DA day one should say, if you commit a crime in Los Angeles County, I'm going to hold you accountable and I'm going to hold you responsible. That sets the example. It sets the tone. And so it tells people that, no, if you do something wrong, you are going to be held accountable. But also then you need to be empathetic and you need to be understanding, because I've made mistakes too in my life. And so then we need to tell people too, we're also there for you, and we do want to help you if you make a mistake. If you own up to that mistake and you want to be rehabilitated, we want to help you there as well. And I think that's important too. And so you try to balance those two things. The problem is George Gascon has gone way to one side. He seems to care more about criminals and people doing bad things than he does about victims or family members. Some of his policies make no sense. Also, blanket policies never work. And anybody, I think, would agree with this. We should take each individual case and assess it on a case-by-case basis. That does justice for the victim, the family, the community, and the defendant. Sometimes we can help somebody. We can help a defendant who commits a crime. But you need to look at those cases individually on a case-by-case basis. The way George has done it is he's lazy. He wants to have blanket policies. I hope also your listeners know, and this city knows, George Gascon has never prosecuted one case. He's never walked into court as a DA. He's never filed a case on his own. He's never questioned a witness. He's never had to have somebody who was sexually assaulted or sexually molested have to put that person on the stand and question them in front of the defendant. He's never done any of those things. And so, I really believe in leading by example. I served 7 years in the United States Army, and I learned that there as well. A leader should lead by example. And if you've never done any of the cases that I've done, how can I follow you? How can you lead? How can you know what you really need to do to help the system?
Very well spoken. Something I do want to bring up, because the, I believe, 2-year anniversary is coming up this Saturday that relates to what we're talking about because of enhancements, or the lack of them, is the murder of Michelle Dorsey. She's a mother of 3 boys, and she was tragically murdered by her estranged husband. The relationship wasn't exactly clear. But part of the enhancements that weren't filed that I am aware of included the fact that he had to break into the house. He had a firearm with him. It was meant to be a kidnapping. All of these additional things that then were not filed. And I'm talking about this because this is something that her family, her mother, her sister, her 3 children who had to help their mother from their father, now feel threatened and feel violated in a whole new way, because the system that is meant to help them is now refusing to prosecute this guy to the full extent of the law. How is that fair?
And it's not. And they were violated a second time by the district attorney. And it's horrendous. Michelle was a loving soul. She was such a good person, and she was such a loving mother. I met Michelle's mom and sister. I also became close with Michelle's boyfriend, Sky. And Sky and I still talk. And, Sky was devastated about what happened. It's horrendous. The fact that a district attorney wouldn't stand up and fight for her and file special circumstances in that case is sick. And that's what I mean. It doesn't mean that you have to have the hammer on every case. But these horrendous cases, George Gascon has no empathy. He doesn't seem to have a connection with individuals who are family members of individuals who have been victims of crime. And you have to be empathetic as the DA. You have to also be a person. Like, not only am I a prosecutor, I'm also a dad. I'm also a member of this community. I'm also a husband. I'm also friends with people. I also like people, and I like this community, and I like talking to people. And, if somebody has suffered that way, and you have the evidence, why would you not want to charge that? It's hard to understand. It makes me mad. It also makes me sad. And it makes no sense. And why are people voting for this person? I don't get it. And I know people want to have a good district attorney who cares. And I just want to tell the community, I care, and I do want to help individuals, but my number one job is to make sure the public is safe, and that means fighting for victims and fighting for family members. And if you break into somebody's home, kidnap somebody, brutally murder them, we are going to charge that person to the fullest extent of the law. We are going to fight for the family members. We are going to fight for that victim, and we're going to make sure we get justice. And that isn't political. That's just the right thing to do. And that's the other problem with George. He makes everything political. The problem is the district attorney's office is not political. It means you just do the right thing. And I fight for Republicans. I fight for Democrats. I fight for independents. Children don't have any political party. And I fight for them. And so people need to realize district attorneys, it shouldn't be political. It should be about doing the right thing.
And I think that calling in the fact that you're a dad and you fight for kids is a great example, because I don't know how many kids you have, but I think in terms of our parents out there who are listening, do you treat all your kids the same way in terms of the approach you take with them? Probably not. Your kids are going to react differently. Your kids are probably in a different spot developmentally, emotionally, all these different things. So you can't take the same one-size-fits-all with your kids. Why would you be able to do that with something so much more complex as the criminal justice system, especially for a 34 million person county?
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. I could tell you this, and I hope listeners are paying attention. My number one job is being a dad. That's the most important thing in my life, is being a father. I always wanted to be a father. So, and I love fighting for my kids and fighting for the kids in my cases. And so, it was just a blessing to be able to be a dad. My wife lives in this community, and if you didn't know, she's a police officer here. She works in the sheriff's department. She's a detective. And so we're sort of a law and order family here. I went to Sierra Vista and Canyon. My wife went to Valencia. And so I've been in this community a long time. My kids were both born in Henry Mayo. And so, people need to realize that one size doesn't fit all in the criminal justice system. Everybody's different, and every case is different. And everybody deserves for us to look at their individual case. And everybody deserves individual justice. That isn't a blanket policy. That's a case-by-case basis. But George has never done our cases, and so he just doesn't know. He's a politician. He's not a district attorney. He's not somebody out there caring for people. He mostly cares about himself, and he makes everything very, very political instead of trying to unite people. We have too much division, and a lot of it has to do with politics. We need to unite people, and that means bringing Republicans, Democrats, everybody together. Stop fighting based on politics. We should be based on people.
Entirely understandable. Now, we do have a couple of minutes left. The election won't be until 2024, so you got more than a couple minutes there. Is there anything you would like to share with LA County voters and the people in your Santa Clarita Valley about your campaign or your goals if you win?
I would tell you this. I'd love people to go to my website. It's jonathanhatami.com. I have listed everything about myself and about the policies and procedures that we're going to implement. I want to let people know I want your vote. I want your support. I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to make sure that we have public safety. I'm going to make sure that we have transparency. And we have a complete lack of transparency in government now. And I'm going to make sure that we hold serious wrongdoers accountable. So I hope you go to my website, which is jonathanhatami.com. I hope you join our fight. If you can, please donate. We need to raise as much money as we can because we're fighting George Gascon, and he has a lot of special interests backing him. I want your vote, and I want your support.
And we will definitely be sure to include that link on our website. We will have an article to accompany this video, so it will be available online on all of our different social medias. But thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
No, I appreciate it, Jade, and thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here at this local radio station. It's been around for centuries, not centuries, but decades. It seems like centuries, and definitely an honor to be here and to be on your show, and I'll come back anytime.
Fantastic. That's LA County District Attorney Jonathan Hatami, who is running against current LADA George Gascon in the 2024 election. To watch the full interview and hear more Santa Clarita news, keep on tuning in to KHTS 98.1 FM, AM 1220, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at KHTS Radio.